So Cote, I'm relatively new to tech and I'm also new to like the corporate world altogether.
Mhm.
So how valuable is well, in your experience, how valuable are tech recruiters? Are they doing good in the world? Or are they just existing to annoy me on LinkedIn?
Well, it sounds like you might have a LinkedIn problem. Maybe
Yeah.
LinkedIn is an enabler for, recruiter annoyance. I think, thinking through the recruiters I've talked with in my, days, 2 of them pop to mind on opposite ends of the spectrum. I
Uh-huh.
think one of them didn't make it clear that I was about to get a really shitty job, and so the result there was not optimal, as they say. But then the other one that I talk with, that got me the job at Pivotal and VMware and Broadcom and blah blah blah, where you and I worked. That person was great. They were basically just like, "Hey, what do you need?" I mean, that's a very quick summary, and they were there to pretty much help me figure out like what was going on. And the person, my boss, the person that was hiring me, wasn't exactly a font of helpful corporate bureaucracy. And so it was good for him to have someone help him with that sort of
So
stuff.
you interacted with the recruiter after you applied for the job.
That's right. Except for that first one that I mentioned. Well, that was when I was like laid off from a job, and so they came in as the I don't know, moral
Outsourcing.
janitor to help clean up the mess management had made.
So it seems to me, from my outside perspective, we have recruiters reaching out on LinkedIn. We have recruiters, if you know you want a job, maybe you can find a recruiter on purpose. I'm not sure about this and I'd like to ask. And then there's recruiters that you get who represent the company, who you get put in contact with once you
Mm.
apply to a company. Right? Is that so? Behind the scenes here, the person, well, Cote and I feel our way through the dark in terms of what recruiters are and what they do. We have a real bona fide tech recruiter with us. Sydney, will you please say hello and introduce yourself and tell us about tech recruiters and how we as tech employees should understand them? How do they fit into the ecosystem?
Oh gosh, so. Hi everyone. My name is Sidney Miller, and I have been on the back end systems infrastructure tech side of things for about 23, 24 years. If you can
Mm.
believe it, my first client was Sun Microsystems back in the day.
Oh
You
wow.
know, yeah. Oh wow, I was right. It was it was a thing. So I live in Phoenix, and I've I do a lot of different things. However, I'm mostly a what like to call an inclusionist, where I find opportunities for marginalized populations in tech, and so it's a focal point of mine. I mean, obviously, everyone's invited, but I kind of swim in the pools of inclusion and try and bring those voices to the interview process, which I think we can get into in a minute. I've worked at
Yeah.
all the big ones. I've got experience in startups. That I'm at a startup now, which is more in, it's a veterinary pharma company, which is a little bit different than tech, but they have, some GitHub alumni, which is how I ended up at the organization. And they're building out their tech stack right now to support this amazing mission that we have. Anyways, long story short, um, I'm I'm kind of specialized in startups. And I think that your question is really kind of there's so many ways to get in touch with a recruiter, although
Yeah.
you're probably hearing from a million of them on LinkedIn, which I think is hilarious because, LinkedIn is a tool. It shouldn't be a main source of communication, to be quite honest, because there's a lot of spamming, right? And a lot
Uh-huh.
of people who are like yesterday, I got one. It's like, Sydney, you would be a great SRE at this XYZ company in Phoenix. And I'm like, did you even read what I do? I mean, yes, I've hired the site reliability engineering org at GitHub, and I, grew it at Packet, and I did all these wonderful things. But I'm not an SRE. Nobody wants me coding or touching any infrastructure whatsoever. I mean, I get it, because I'm a student of the environments that I'm in, and I can put, the Lego pieces together, so to speak. But, recruiting is a different animal. It really is. And I'm a I'm totally different than your standard recruiter, right?
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that answers your question, but I can
So
kind of, yeah, go
it
ahead.
sounds like there's recruiters who represent companies such as
Mhm.
yourself who are
Yep.
building teams.
Yep.
And then are there recruiters who are meant to represent individuals who are not spammers? Recruiters
Yes.
who are not spammers, yeah,
So
who
it's
represent
both.
individuals.
Right. So like in my travels, I have represented several people that I've known just in my network, right? So I've got
Mm-hmm.
a pretty vast network. I, talk a lot on Twitter and whatnot. So I know people. And so when I have opportunities and when I have like a match, that's where it's kind of like a matchmaker, right? I keep
Uh-huh.
my network really, really crisp and really, really connected, because I never know if I'm going to have an opportunity or know of an opportunity through my network that needs someone like a Whitney Lee, right? So,
Uh-huh.
if I were to be like, oh, somebody pings me and said, do you know anybody that would be great at, developer relations or site reliability, or, is a great back end stack engineer, not a full stack, but back end, I would be like, mental Rolodex. Yep, I've got this person. I can recommend you and connect. So that's one way that we do this. But
Uh-huh.
then there's also people who are just sitting at their desk waiting for inbound people to apply, and then the buckets grow, and then they're only taking the top 10 off the, top of the stack, which is not a thorough job, right? And
Yeah.
so you're sitting in limbo for a while. You have applied to this role, and then, all of a sudden you get a rejection letter. It happens, right? Like sometimes, especially in these times when jobs are really, slim, and there's not a lot of opportunity as it was in COVID, right? um like I posted a job, and within a week I got 600 applicants.
And then do you look at all 600 of those applications? Yes. Do all recruiters look at all 600? No. Of those
No, I mean,
applications.
it's a challenge, and I think as one individual with 600 profiles for one job is a lot. It's a lot to come
Uh-huh.
across, but then again, to be fair and equitable, you have to, right?
Uh-huh.
So a lot of times people will go through like, at one point in time there's 150 resumes, and they'll go through that 150 resumes and then pick out the top 10 that make that makes sense for the role, and then interview
Mhm.
them, right? And that's the hard part, is that people have just varied backgrounds and can do the job, but is it specific enough to the role to actually hire this individual into it, right? Is there a specific type of, are they are they familiar with Go, or do they only work with C++, or like somebody who
Mhm.
needs to have Go is going to be, the person that probably gets the conversation, because versus somebody that has C++ only, right? Because it's just a different language and it's more fluid, and all of those things, right? So
And
they've got to match the criteria. Um
how
but
do
then
you
again,
weed out the people who are lying or the people who
ooh,
are fluffing things up? And also relatedly, probably, how do you make sure you're doing your diversity and inclusion that you advocate for?
yeah, so that's where sourcing comes in, where you go out, like what I do is I take the incoming, right? But then I also
Uh-huh.
go out and say, okay, here's a
Oh.
Boolean search string, which is different than just going on LinkedIn and sending 250 emails. Very different. So, just FYI, listeners, and viewers, if you see something that says in mail and it doesn't make any sense, that's somebody just saying, doing a slightly complex Boolean search string in LinkedIn Recruiter that populates your profile against the search criteria, and then they click all, and then they email everyone. Kind of
Ah.
like the email I received yesterday where they were like, "Hey, by the way, you want to be an SRE? Like, trust me, if I could be one, I know I'd love to be one, but it's just not my, like in my mind capacity to do that, right? That's why I recruit engineers versus I being an engineer. um I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a lot of different ways to kind of attack this. But yeah, there's variations of recruiting. I think people who've been in the world of recruiting for long enough, back to when things actually used to use fax machines and paper resumes, are a
Uh-huh.
little bit different and feel the end point, right? Being like you have empathy for the person that's on the other side of the communication versus just
Uh-huh.
being like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and just, blanket this and see how many come back and pepper that and see if what comes back, where it's a little bit more focused. And, the way that to go back and answer your question, how do you get through the, how else do I say this? The
The
BS?
liars. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you get through the BS? That's by being really, really tight knit and close with your hiring leader and understanding the criteria and understanding the environment and understanding the technology and being like, so say, that both of you are my hiring managers. I wouldn't be like, okay, so, you want them to start on this date and they need to have this, this, and this. Great. Okay, I'll go and find them. Whereas it's like, tell me the impact of the job. Tell me what you're building. Tell me why it's scalable. Tell me why this is an important language. Why are you building it in this, that, and the other thing? What are the implications downstream and upstream? Those kind of things that, like, I'm sure y'all could probably, if you had a good recruiter, they've asked those kind of questions, because then it's like, okay, I kind of understand the job, right?
Uh-huh.
But also, like, it's my job to go in there and weed out all that stuff. And it does take a conversation, right? I mean, some
Yeah.
people preload it with questions that where you have to fill it out an application. And I mean, that's okay and fair and whatnot. I mean, that's a very
Uh-huh.
big
Have you
company
ever
battle
just
kind of.
gotten it totally wrong?
Oh,
Have you ever
yeah.
just hired like the worst people? How did you figure it out and how did you learn from it?
So that's a great question, because there's only so much time that you spend with people. And if they're like all
Right.
like,
If they
tap
can talk
dance
the
and
talk, yeah.
yeah, and if they can talk the talk and they come in and then they're not a culture fit, or, which I really don't love culture fit, that kind of scenario,
Sounds
because
culty.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. But if they're not a fit to the organization, that is something that is really hard to kind of navigate through. That's why very pointed and very organized interview panels and consistent interview panels are important, right? Because not
What's an
only are you,
interview panel? Just like a way to
yeah.
talk about everyone someone's interviewing with one at a
So
time, or
so
is it a
interview
literal
panels
panel?
are the
Yeah.
actual interviews, right? So,
Okay.
typically it would be a conversation with me where I kind of cover all the brass tacks. I get all the questions, answers for the hiring manager, so they can be like,
Okay.
okay, we're going to cut that person, we're going to keep this person. We're going to cut that person because this is the person in the profile that I need. And then it's my job to do all the selling of the org, the team, the technology. So when they get to the hiring manager isn't spending time selling the job. They're
Yeah.
actually talking about the content of what they're about to build and what they're about to do. And then not only that, but like it helps them have a just a more well-rounded, like, does it pass the sniff test kind of thing? Like, is this
Yeah.
person truly, because I'm not technical, but I'm technical enough to be dangerous, right? Where I can hang with people because I've been doing it for so long. I kind of understand how it all kind of works together, but I couldn't build for anything, right? So once they get to the hiring manager, that is one part of the interview process or interview paneling. And then the final interview would be consistent of 2 to 3 interviews with the same people with the same question sets. And then the most important piece to me, I think, is the debrief, right? So that is when the entire organization or the entire interview team gets together and discusses and has feedback sessions with the hiring manager about like what went right, what went wrong, what kind of questions should we be asking, like do we need to sharpen this, do we need to sharpen that. And it's really like a great learning experience, so you can get really razor sharp on like, okay, the profile is and the person is this, and like
Uh-huh.
this is who we need on the team, but not only do we need it on the technical sense, but this is what we need from an empathy perspective, and this is what we need from a human perspective, and this is what we need for a kind of feedback perspective. And so you're digging more than just being like, tell me a time that you had a challenging time at work. That's
Mhm.
very vague. These whole like tell me a time conversations are like, for me, I'm like, oh, it should be like, let's talk and dig into this, and let's talk and dig into that, right? Which is more impactful than having a super vague question about a time that they philosophically thought about something, right?
So what? How do you? There's a lot of stuff that has to go right in that process,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
like, what do you do to like interview the companies you're going to be working for? Like, how do you figure out like my whole system is going to work here or it's not? Right? Like, what are the questions you ask of a company before you go to work for them?
Oh gosh. So
Doing
I asked
recruiting.
them to clearly define what their interview pathways are, and how they source their candidates. If they're like, oh yeah, we just throw up a job rec and just see who comes in. Well, I know that I can make a huge like blowout impact at that company because I'd be going out and sourcing, which is something they don't do, right? There's a lot of recruiters that'll just pass paper, right? Because not and I don't want to be like all like in my own, profession, but it's people have gotten super lazy. Like COVID was like fish in a barrel. It was like, okay, there was tons of people who wanted to move, and it was just a really exciting time, and there was a lot of opportunity, and everybody was like going willy-nilly, but like especially in cloud and infrastructure, right? So we saw a whole bunch of hiring happening there, but and that was it's not that anymore, right? It,
Mm.
it's not that anymore.
So,
And
so it sounds like one of the first expectations is we're going to not just get fish out of a barrel. We might have to
yeah.
go hike somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Continue this metaphor to do our fishing or whatever, and so forth and so on, right? And like for example, uh, like how have you managed the whole debriefing retrospective stuff with teams that don't really do it well? And do it well
Mm.
could just be like not taking it seriously or not contributing or not just not doing it. Like,
Yeah.
how do you drive them to do that?
It's by listening and educating at every step of the way, because to be honest with you, especially dealing with engineers, there's a lot of people who are super cerebral, right? And they
Mm,
just communicate differently, and you have to understand that about people, right? Not everybody's going to be the outgoing recruiter type like me, whereas going to be some people are going to be a little bit more reserved or have their feedback be very short and punctual and all of that. That's okay, right? So I think it's over time just making them, making the interviewers comfortable with their voice, because so many times in interviews and in feedback
mm.
sessions, it's like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing because the hiring manager really likes this candidate, right? Which is
Oh.
important for the hiring manager to always go last,
Mm.
Right.
because then it's not a biased kind of scenario where it's like, well, I can't really say anything that's against this candidate because my hiring manager really loves them. But if you give the people the opportunity to speak their mind and say, these are the reasons why I really like this candidate, or maybe I could struggle with this candidate, or they didn't have this, or they have this, like it's a way for you to be seen and heard at work. And when you actually are those things, production and innovation just, I say this all the time, it just falls out of people because they feel included and they feel like part of it and that their voice matters, right? And when you give people that opportunity, it just it works. And I don't know how to explain it other than just giving people the space and the time to be themselves, but also be heard.
Mm. And so, like, let's see, uh, like connected to that. So it's always fun to talk
Yeah.
with people on the other side of the table of this stuff.
Yeah.
I've
Right?
never recruited anyone
Yeah.
that I can
You
remember.
probably have. You probably have, and you just don't
Maybe so.
categorize it.
I think Whitney and I co-recruited each other for this podcast, so we
There you
didn't fill out
go.
any. There was no DocuSign involved, so I'm not sure it's above board, but we'll see.
There was no offer negotiation.
That's right. That's right. So, like in the tech world, like, what do you think about the effectiveness? Whether it's in infrastructure or programming of like whatever you want to call it, practical tests. Like,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
places where you sit down and do some coding, or you know, I don't know if they still do this at Pivotal or whatever we call it now, but you would spend like an hour or so coding with someone or doing something. And I don't know, maybe if you're doing SRE stuff, you like read some log files or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But
Are
like,
you
is
YAML
that
literate?
is that
Yeah.
good or bad, or when does it apply or not? Like, how does that fit into the process?
So I'm a true believer that if you are going to make a test or a code sample a priority and a prerequisition of interviewing, that it better be the candidate's own code set, and that they can
Mm,
have the opportunity to submit it before the interview, and that the interview is actually about their code, because there's a million ways to look at code, right?
Hmm.
There's a million ways to look at it. And yes, I'm sure that there are, bits and boops and things that need to go in a certain order for it to work. But then the innovation is in that one person's perspective, which is, to be honest with you, is their whole livelihood, their what they've done in an organization, the education that they may or may not have, because that's also a thing. It's that whole person that's coming to you and said, I've seen this, I've seen this, I've seen this, and I've coded this, and this is the reason why I did it. And then working through, and if there's a mistake in it, being able to see how there's like a way to solve it together. I think that is the most humane way to interview against a code set, versus being like, oh, here's a go test, go see what you score on it. Because is it applicable? Is it
right.
all like the
So I'm
whole
hearing
go ahead.
two things. Like it should mirror what the job actually is. Like
Yeah.
it shouldn't just be a random like test about how good you are at something or not.
Yeah.
And so second of all, it should really reflect what the skills that you need for the job. And then second of all, the ones where you're having to do it live and people are watching you do it, you're advising against those. And for one reason, sounds like it's coming back to the diversity and inclusion hires. Like this is something that maybe white males are socialized to be more comfortable being watched while you're doing something, and
Yeah.
other people might feel nervous about it.
Well, and let's also talk about our neurodivergent friends,
Yeah.
where it's so hard and tough to be like, okay, there's all sorts of different types of people, and everybody learns a little bit different, and everybody codes a little bit different. That's why I think that inviting somebody and letting them know, like, hey, we're going to walk through some code sets, because to be honest with you, you're going to walk through code sets and code reviews, you're going to walk through code sets in working one-on-one with people. So and then there's special concessions and special accommodations. Concessions maybe wasn't the right word, but accommodations that you do ask, like, do you need special accommodations for this? And they can opt into that, or they can opt out of that. And I think that truly is an inclusive kind of way to think about it, other than like, here, go to this external testing site and see what you score,
Yeah.
because if you're just looking at like fundamentals, like who's going to sit and code from their CS degree and learning, like, not everything's a binary tree, for crying out loud, right? And like,
How
let's do
can
bubble
you
sorts,
maximize the number of parking spaces that fit in the
Yeah,
slot?
how many
Yeah.
golf balls fit in a Jetta that is going from Boston to California? Well, you know what? Who cares? That, what does that have to do with the job? You know?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I hope that
I
answers
got
the question.
I got a task. I've been interviewing for jobs lately, and I got a task, and one thing that struck me about it is like, okay, I agree with most things on this task, but also one part of it doesn't make sense at all. So I'm just gonna ignore that part and solve
Yep.
it for everything else because that
Yep.
part's dumb. But like, there's a younger version of me that would have like bent over backwards to make it fit exactly in the parameters that they asked for. And I don't know if I feel like that's something to be careful about too. I think it's socialized, being a woman, I'm supposed to follow the rules. Like that's something I've had to unlearn. and now I've unlearned it. But like, I think you're hurting yourself if you're giving too rigid rules and not leaving enough space for someone to be who they are
Well, and what
and
happened
make
with
sense of it.
creativity? Yeah, what happened to
Yeah, yeah.
creativity in the workplace? My
Uh,
gosh, like, yes, we're all supposed to do this, and yes, it's all supposed to be like, dur, 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 dur.
uh-huh.
No, because what I would do, Whitney, is be like, I did all this, but I saw this as like a fundamental, like, this doesn't make sense to me. Could you explain it why it's important here? And then I can
Yeah.
answer it. And just
That's
kind
what
of like
yeah.
push back and be like, it's not that I didn't do it. It just in this exercise, it didn't make any sense to me because of my history, my background, and whatnot. And
Yep.
everything I've done didn't have this component in it. So why is it
Uh-huh.
important here? And then stop.
I didn't do it. I acknowledged that I didn't do it. And they loved what I turned in. Like they
See?
didn't seem to mind one bit that I didn't do the part that I thought was dumb.
Yeah.
And I
There's
told them
also
why.
always the danger that it's a trick question. Like I remember in one of these practical or whatever you want to call it interview things, I remember it was intentionally stupid, and
Yeah.
the whole goal was to be like, "Are you going to tell us this is stupid?" Which in my older age kind of seems stupid, but I
Yeah.
guess it
Uh-huh.
was effective at the time. But yeah, I mean, no one likes trick questions.
Well,
That's
and
just
how is
not a
that
weird
fair?
game.
Yeah.
How is
Exactly.
that fair? Like, I mean, wouldn't that kind of so maybe I'm just that certain type of person, but like trick questions, are you going to ask me trick questions every day at work? Like, why are you
That's right.
why are you emulating this? Is this the way that you work internally? Because that to me is a sign of ego,
Yeah.
right? It
Well,
really is.
that brings up a good topic. Like
Yeah.
I like to think when I'm talking with people, I'm also trying to not well, maybe not here. When I'm talking with someone about a job, I'm trying to
Yeah.
like reverse interview them, like figure out if I would
Mhm.
like working there, and
Yeah.
like, what would you recommend people do for that reverse interviewing? You know, eh, it's it's like fine to say you should figure out if this is like a place you want to work,
Yeah.
but like how do you actually do that in an interview? What do you ask and how do you kind of process that?
Yeah, so I think you sit down and you think long and hard and prepare. I mean, that's one thing that people don't do. They're so busy, right?
Mm,
But sit down and write out what's important to you as a
right.
Mhm.
person and as an engineer, because you need to ask questions based on that, and it's okay to, because people are waiting for you to ask questions. Like, one thing that I would say, how rigorous is your sprints? Like, how how does your team deal with conflict? These are all very fair questions, because they're going to ask you,
Mhm.
and you can almost turn it around and say, well, this is a great question for me, but I'm curious, like, what has happened in this organization? Why is this job open? Did
Mhm.
somebody leave? um, I wouldn't necessarily go like, what are the conditions about, because nobody can say anything because it's an HR, legal kind of thing. But you can
Sure.
kind of sniff around and get like to the bottom of it. Like, why did you choose go? Or I keep picking on go, it's just easy. Why did you choose this pathway? And ask those implications, like I said, downstream and upstream. Those are really good questions to ask, because do you want to be part of maintenance, or do you want to build, right? So think about those types of questions that you would ask like a friend or a
Some
colleague.
Something about my recent experience job searching, I don't know if this is specific to me, but it's very weird. And
Okay.
that is nobody talks about money until the last step.
Which is
Like,
so dumb.
it's so dumb. Can we
Yeah.
please, like, that should be an upfront part. It's such an important factor. And it's almost like the times that I've said to a recruiter that it is an important factor, they've been offended. Like, I should love the idea of the job so much that it doesn't matter that it pays competitively. Like, I don't understand. Is this normal? I guess is the question. And if it's
Not in
normal,
my
what can we do
world.
about it? Okay.
I nail down, I talk about what the salary is, what the equity component is, what the level is, like all those things, because I'm not wasting my time going in like for a junior role when they're like, but you really like us, don't you?
Yeah.
Or we're XYZ company and we're a unicorn. Well, that's great,
Uh,
but how am I going to pay my mortgage?
yeah.
Like, it's
It is
got
a
to
job
make
in the end. I do want to love it, but it's a job. It's something I'm trading my time for money. So let's talk about a very important component up front, please.
I absolutely 1000% agree that you should talk about that in the first call. It's something that I do as a recruiter, and it kind of sometimes makes people uncomfortable. They're like, "Why are we talking about this?" And I'm like, "Because I want you to understand what you're about to walk into." Right. And you can turn that around and say, I want to know what I'm about to walk into. And I need to make sure that this makes sense for me financially before we move forward. You have a range. What's the level? And what's the commensurate compensation based upon the level? It's
I
very
was,
fair. And
yeah.
they
Mm-hmm.
are supposed to put this on their job recs if they hire in
Mm-hmm.
the state of California, New York. There's 13 countries, goodness, states where you maybe more, and I haven't had that much coffee yet, but it's a law. And
Uh-huh.
FYI, no one can ask you what you make. Period.
Uh-huh.
It's illegal. So if somebody's like, tell me what you W-2'd last year, you'd be like, funny, you can't ask me that.
I've heard that you're not ever supposed to say the number first as a candidate. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so you could be like,
Uh-huh.
my threshold, my floor is this, but my
Mm-hmm.
expectation is this.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be or could not be what you've already made. It could
Mm-hmm.
be 20% more, it could be 40% more, it could be whatever you want it to be honest with you, because nobody can ask you the question to produce receipts. Does it make it complicated? Yeah. But you know what?
Mm-hmm.
That's what there's all sorts of systems called like PAVE and Radford that people like have these, like, if you're a level 5 engineer, which means that you're a senior IC, it equates to this much money in this demographic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's always wiggle. There's always
Mm-hmm.
wiggle. Like, so um I think it's unbelievably important to talk about compensation in the first call. And I don't think that anybody should be fearful to do that, because if they're going to hide that from you until the end of the call, what kind of company is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
What if
no one wants to spend like 2 or 3 weeks interviewing, and then you find out like, oh, this pays a third as much as I thought
Yeah.
it would, and that's not good for anyone.
Yeah, and then it turns into a terrible candidate experience, and then everybody ends up leaving like, okay, that was a waste of time. Like, time is money, people. And like, you could be interviewing at another company that's been completely transparent with you, which transparency is an anomaly nowadays. But with all these laws going into effect, they should post this stuff, especially if it's remote and if it's in California or New York, some of the big demographics or the big geographical areas, should have it posted, and it's okay for you to ask what's the compensation.
there so sometimes I'm on program committees and I help decide like what talks get accepted to a conference.
Sure.
And I'm struck by one emotional and mental dilemma I have. I can see where this talk is objectively good. It's well written. It has a clear outcome.
Yeah,
It all the grammar is correct. This is a good one. But then it's like inevitably by someone who's privileged because you have education as part of what's enabling you to be able to write that proposal.
for sure.
And then I see other ones that are really interesting, have an interesting premise, but then the follow through, and maybe it's just a language thing or maybe it's an education thing. So,
Right.
how do you, and I imagine you must see something similar in your job position. And so, how do you navigate someone? I guess it all comes back to the DE and I
Hmm.
initiatives. How do you help underrepresented people have their voice heard when maybe their voice isn't as educated sounding as everyone else's who's
So this is
applying?
where influence internally is a big deal.
Uh
So
huh.
see yourself as the subject matter expert in recruiting and say, why is it a prerequisite to have a master's? What
Yeah.
about a master's is going to make somebody who has 10 years of code experience that probably can, that it, look at their GitHub. I mean, look at this, look at that. Like, why does a piece of paper matter? And normally that
Mm-hmm.
is just like old school thinking, where I have gone into organizations and said, I understand that, like, in some scientific fields and some things like that, it's kind of a thing. But in
Mm-hmm.
engineering, think of all the people who've gone to code camps in the middle of Baltimore,
Uh huh.
right? And that is inclusion, right? Not just hiring everybody that went to Stanford CS school and, graduated in this top of the class that tends to look and feel and seem all the same. And they have like no group. It's all, like the same thought because they were all studied the same thing, right? Whereas if you get somebody who went to Stanford and you get somebody from that boot camp in Baltimore, and you know, and you go into these specific parts of the country, like that are predominantly or that are not represented, and you give them the opportunity to be seen in the process. I mean, the process is consistent and compliant because the interview panels are all the same, the questions are all the same. That's what I'm here to do and ensure that it's not like, oh well, you can meet this person and that person and this person, and then it's not a consistent or compliant interview process, because that's where bias is introduced. But when you make it about the individual and you bring them together from different pieces of the world, that's how you get innovation, right? So it's our job as recruiters to be like, whoa, 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 whoa. I understand that you want an Ivy League, but why would you fill your team with Ivy Leagues? Tell me why.
Yeah.
And then just start to challenge that. And if they keep saying, no, it needs to have this, or no, it has to be that, you could just be like, we need to make sure that we check for an unconscious bias and bring bias
Mhm.
into the conversation, which a lot of people are not comfortable with. Like, I could care less. Like, my job is to make sure that this is the best team in the world. And when I was at GitHub, we did that type of work, right? Where we hired seniors, we hired people who had just come out of like code camps, and who had a year experience, that used to be a stay-at-home mom, like all that experience of these individuals made the site reliability org at GitHub what it was. And I worked really heavily with one of the directors and said, we're going to look at this different. Are you okay with that? And she was like, yeah, let's go for it. And we were able to build a team that was super, super inclusive. But you should have seen the stuff that they were making, because it was like, just because.
It made a better team.
Yeah. So here's another example. So I was at a company and we were at an offsite, and the SVP the CTO, SVP, we're all sitting at the end of the table. And then of course, everybody else is at the edge of the table, and we're sitting there, and they were talking about a complex issue that they couldn't figure out. Right. And they were just like, da, 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 da. And one of the people that was new, who came from like a larger organization, not a startup, was like listening and was like, have you thought of doing it this way or maybe that way? And they were like, no. Could you help us? And he was like,
Amazing.
I'm new. This is like, I've been here a week. Like, oh my God, like, am I going to screw this up? They came through to a solution. It wasn't both of their ideas that ended up being baked. It was the combination of the thought process that solved the problem, which just goes to show you that everybody should have the opportunity to work on an issue, to regardless if they're young in their industry, in the industry, or if they've gotten 30 years experience, because there's got to be common ground in the middle, especially for innovation.
What's a bias that people have but don't know they have? What do you
Oh,
see?
it's kind of hard to do that because everybody's an individual, right?
Okay.
So it depends upon, what you bring to work every day,
Uh-huh.
to be honest. I think that one of the most common ones is language. I'm just going to call it out. Language
Uh-huh.
is hard. So people are like, can they communicate correctly? Or
Mm.
the other thing too is, if our neurodivergent friends haven't looked for special accommodations because they don't want to like pin themselves as being that person too, because people are
Mhm.
really sensitive about it. Communication that way as well, right? So communication is a big one that trips people up, and you have to just make sure that you talk to your teams about, like, everybody communicates differently. Not everybody's going
Mhm.
to be a Sydney. Not everybody's going to be like, XYZ person that, is going to attack it from all sides. There's going to be different types of mindsets and different types of communication patterns. They have to match, but and it
Mhm.
has to make sense. But I think that that's one of the most common biases. And then also the education bias is so
Mhm.
big, and it makes me so angry because, you know, some of the best engineers I know never went to college,
Yeah. Yeah.
So like in the let's see, in the bigger world,
Yeah.
I don't know what that means in the bigger world,
The big
but
wide world.
there you go. I look at surveys a lot
Hmm.
because I have thrilling entertainment sources. But something that I see over the years consistently is that, let's call them CIOs or hiring managers, whatever.
Yeah.
Like they're always freaking out about not being able to hire the right people. I mean, or the skills that they need, or like there's a talent gap or something. And it could be a time like now where you get 600 applicants, or it could be a time like several years ago where you get 5 or whatever. But
Yeah.
just like all the time people are complaining about not being able to hire people, which as let's say an IC type of person, I always think like there's a lot of us out there, right?
Uh-huh.
Like what like what's going on that on one side it seems like people are upset they can't find people, and on the other side people are like, I'd love to be found. Like
Yeah.
there's some weird disconnect going on there.
So I think to speak to that is your leader here or are they here?
Right.
And that is something that people like myself are supposed to crank those levers. So it's like, open your mind, see that there's more to this than just Stanford or Harvard or whatever, right? It could be anything. Like, I only want people from large organizations because we're working on big problems, or we're working on this. So I don't want to see somebody who's been in the startup world, because that normally means they've only been around for 2 years. 2 years in a startup is probably worth more than 5 years in a big organization. You can at me about that, but like, honestly, like, I've been in enough startups and I've worked at all the big ones, like I've said, and I have seen more innovation cranked out of startups because of necessity and
Mm.
whatnot. So to me, if hiring managers are like, there's just no talent out there, well, what are your parameters, and what are you trying to what do you need to get over as a leader to not see what I'm seeing in the competitive marketplace? Because here's all the data. Tell me what I'm missing, right?
What if someone wants to be found? What should they do?
Um, so so socials,
Yeah.
network, LinkedIn. I mean,
Mhm.
again, LinkedIn is a tool for me. It's not an end all be all, but you're seeing it turn into this whole thing versus a network community to be like a job finding, or, representation, kind of like, I'm looking for a job, I'm open to work kind of stuff. Socials. But I would say network as much as you
Mhm.
possibly can, because you never know who knows somebody, who knows somebody, who knows somebody. And good people are out there. There are good people in this industry. There really are, So ask for help. I mean, and if they don't want to help you, well, then later, nerds.
You brought up a topic again earlier that I wanted to ask more about, which is uh, I don't know, like oftentimes when I go through life, to add too much context to this question, I feel like someone forgot to give me a manual about
Yeah.
how things operate. And one of those areas, I think I've been a little better, but like I always feel like I could read more manuals on how to like network. And networking, not just the initial thing, but like what you're talking about earlier is the, let's say, long-term multi-year networking, which is to say you keep it alive somehow, and like, to systematize it, to only be half joking about it, like, should I be asking people every 3 months how they're doing, or every 8 to 12 months, right? Like, or a touch point, like how
Yeah.
do you put that in your calendar? Like, how do you make sure that
You
happens?
could. You could. I mean, it's funny because people start to network when they know they're going to be looking for another job. Other people kind of understand that, right? But then again, those people that you're probably reaching out to get it, right? Because they've probably done the same thing. I have a beautiful example of how I've turned a network connection into something larger. And it's a
Mm.
friend that you and I, Whitney, have together. And he and I met when I worked at GitHub, and he was a candidate, and I was like, okay, you're awesome. Like, let's stay connected, right? So we did, and we eventually became friends. And he is one of my biggest cheerleaders, but also sends me leads all the time, right?
Mm.
He
Nice.
sends me people that I can help. And that's not just to find a job, it's for negotiating all sorts of things, right? Because, I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, and, I can pretty much say that I know how the inner workings of how this, stuff goes down, right? And I don't mind sharing it because people are like, shh, don't talk about it. It's like, says who? Knowledge is, power, especially in negotiations. So, I kept in touch with him like every 3 months when we first originally, because I knew he was somebody not that could help me, but was cool to know and was really, really smart. And I knew
Mm.
that my end all be all wasn't going to be like, that I could probably take him to the next role that I was going to hire for at the next company, which I did, you know, which I did because I remembered him and I kept that relationship really fresh and just, said, hey, how are things going? Are you good? Like, what's up? How are you as a person versus being like, I see you as a dollar sign as I'm going to hire you and fill my org.
Yeah.
There's a
I think
difference.
that's part of it is seeing other people and not as like I'm not building my network. I genuinely like you. Like
Mm.
I
Yeah.
am building my network, but and then I'm pretty good at if something in my daily life reminds me of someone whose path has crossed mine, I just reach out to them and just like, "Oh, this made me think of you." Or
Yeah.
vice versa, if someone's approaching me for the same reason, I make sure they feel welcome and rewarded and happy that they reached out to me
See,
because
that's
it's an
sweet.
act.
That's a page of the manual that I've only recently found in the
Yeah.
last few years.
Because
Well,
it feels good. It feels
it's an
good when this stuff happens, right?
it feels good
Absolutely.
when it comes your way, but it's also when you're putting it out there, it's an act of vulnerability to be like, "Hey, I saw this and thought of you," or I like this thing you're doing, or whatever.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I think when I was younger, I used to wait for those interactions to come to me, and now I feel more in charge of them, where I'm the
Mm.
one putting them out there, and
Yeah.
uh, and I do it for funsies. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think you probably are in a place in your career where you're like, I can really I can really help somebody. And if that's
yeah.
just giving them the ability to feel seen that day, that's
Hmm.
amazing, right? Because that'll be worth its weight in gold, down the line for whatever you need from that relationship, right? Because it's about relationship building. It's not about like how can you help me today? Like that feels very different than being like, hey, just checking in on you, seeing how you're doing. I really enjoyed our conversation last time,
Mm.
right? Or
Hmm.
hey, my friend has this great job. I thought of you. Here's this, let me know if you're interested. I can make the introduction. Or if not, and you're not ready, that's cool too. Just want to let you know that I thought of you today. Kind of those things, right? Because it feels good because we forgot for a long time about how to be a human and humanity in general, right? Being like, maybe that's the oldie timey part of me that's like, good people do good things and have, good experiences because they move forward on them, right? They action against them instead of being like, no, it's going to be weird and I'm going to be, seen as, what? It's probably going to brighten that person's day because how does it feel when it happens to you? It feels good, right?
Hmm.
You
Well, so
know?
I have one last question, and then
Sure.
whatever however many more Whitney has, well, we'll see. Maybe I'll come up with more. But on the topic of our professional life,
Sure.
so like looking through your background and as you've gone over, you've worked at a lot of places,
Yeah.
and like what's like the process is the wrong word. What's like the journey that you go through when you end up getting a new job? Like when does the spark into your head at first and how do you evaluate it and like what do you do? And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm at a new job. I mean, you
Yeah.
seem like someone who's more conscious of the effect that
Yeah.
you know is going to happen. But how do you decide to get a new job?
There are so many ways I could answer this. There are so many ways. You're either shown that you need to get a new job.
That's a good use of passive voice.
You know what I mean? Like you know, excuse me, is this a family show? Can I say
No.
it's not? Okay. When the shit goes down, you better be ready, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Sure.
there's that. You can feel like maybe this isn't the org for me anymore. Maybe it's grown, or maybe it's like taking a different direction. And like your gut is everything. And I'm not saying like you're showing the door. I'm just saying like you're seeing things that don't assimilate with you as a human being
Right.
anymore.
It's starting to get smelly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you're like, you know, like it's hard when you're like you work so hard for something, and then all of a sudden it's like big bad big company comes in and is like, ha ha, we're gonna absorb you, and you're like, yeah,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I I know, and it's
I
happening
don't know what
so
you could
much.
possibly mean.
I don't know who we're talking about, but like, no, I mean, and that's okay. But then there's all these people that want to work at the big companies and want to do the
Mhm.
things. And there's good people in all sorts of different types of companies. But it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that you have to sit there and take it either.
Right, right. And well,
And
to interrupt all the different ways, and
Yeah.
to ask about that, like, uh, have you come across many people who can operate in most of the, or at least two of those situations, right? So you've got like the startup person, and
Hmm.
then you could have like big company person, right?
Yep.
Like, and on the extreme end of that, you could have like, I still work on mainframe software, right?
Yeah.
Like kind of like working at a, whether
State
it's
level
PE
organization.
or just sort of like steady state, like
Yeah.
profit reaping, right? So
Yep.
like I, I'm just thinking out loud to not get around to asking the question, but I don't think I've encountered that many people that thrive across that spectrum. Like they seem to
Right.
work really well in only one, maybe one and a half of those.
So I think that that's changing since COVID. I mean, I honestly, like
Mm,
back in the day, it's like, okay, I'm going to work at the state for the rest of the day, get my pension, and that's okay for me, right? It's fine. Will they last in a startup? Not going to probably be the right fit. Will you be okay at a startup if you come from a big company? Yes, but depending upon if that org that you're in, were they kind of like an incubation? Were they kind of like a startup
right.
themselves? Were they working on something that was new and fresh and whatnot? Then you see a lot of people translating in and out. There's a lot of people like, I'll never hire somebody from a big company. Well, why? Why? Let's find out what they did. What group were they in? Because that's a big company that does a lot of things. And if they are
Right.
acting as a startup, then great. And then there's people who are like, I don't want people from a startup because they only last 18 months and move on. Well, how much are you paying them? See, so there's all sorts of different things that you can think of, but I think you're going to see more big companies look for scrappy because we need to stay in front of all this innovation that may or may not be happening nowadays with all the new technologies and AI and all that shit coming in. So
That's right. Spoken exhaustedly like someone who worked at Sun Microsystems. Just like, oh, here we go again.
yeah, here we are. But yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of transition between. I mean, I again like, and I don't want to call out our friends that work at like state level entities or in the government, but those pretty much run, unless
Right.
they're like at a consultancy that gets brought in to do the innovation and then leaves, right? So
Right.
I guess you could dissect that a
Like,
minimum.
the joke in this area I always make is like, I don't know if I want my bank to be innovative, right? Like I
Yeah.
kind of like what they do, and if they never changed how they operate, that would probably be for the best, which I think has been proven time and time over again in my lifetime, right? Like
Yeah.
what I want them to do is just like a yearbook, just never change, just stay the way they are. And so that,
Yeah.
and similarly, I think with the state, you kind of don't want the state to change if just the way it's functioning, right? The
Oh
way the
yeah.
bureaucracy works. You want it to be reliable. You almost, I guess by definition, at least in the American system, what you want to happen is there's laws, and then the government works on those, enforcing and working in those laws. You don't want innovation in law following and
Yeah.
government administration.
Yeah, but you do want innovation when you're sitting in the DMV.
This is
You know
true.
what I mean? This is true, where you're like,
Right.
what's the what
I
number
agree.
at?
There's
Like,
innovation as in make what we're doing much better,
yeah,
versus innovation of
systematic
like,
stuff.
what if we decided there is no property ownership? Why don't we try that out in Louisiana for a while?
Right?
My fiat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. No.
My last question has to do with breaking into tech, if or even to like corporate life. So I come from an artist background. My degree's in art. I have a lot of experience as a musician,
Mhm.
and I still have many friends who are artists and or musicians, and maybe still working a restaurant job on the side.
Yeah.
And we're all getting older, and some of them are talking to me about like, how can I actually want that corporate life now, because that's how I'm going to get retirement and healthcare, not in the way I'm going at it now.
Yeah.
And they absolutely have skills that I know would transfer into this world, but convincing anyone in the first place sounds like a tall order. Like, what advice do you have for that person?
Well, it's so a lot of this has to do with privilege and
Mm-hmm.
money, right?
Yes.
Because
Mm-hmm.
training and boot camps and all this stuff costs money.
Yeah.
So, there might be a way for them to do research on like local grants for, like women in tech. There's local money that can be, you can go out and find it. Do I know what that is right now? No. I mean, I can help research if anybody wants to ping me, but there are like retooling
Mm-hmm.
scenarios which are all kind of the rage right now, and getting into, there's all sorts of schools, there's all sorts of like trainings, there's all sorts of things, right? um, I think they just have to look at what they're passionate about. Is it web design? Is it
Mm.
actual code? And the way that they could do this for free is just, and I've talked about GitHub a lot, but it's a free service, and you can get involved in community there, and you can start
Uh-huh.
to learn, and you can find people who will be your ambassador, and help you see what you want to do, and you can test out all sorts of different things. Like the GitHub universe, so to speak, is a real vast one, and it's right there for you, right? You just need to act and get involved, which how how much do you want to advance in that is time invested. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's where I would start, is to poke around, like what looks interesting to me? What is going to align with my passion? Because a lot of creatives and a lot of artists and a lot of musicians end up becoming the best software engineers because they already predispositioned to think in that really mechanical way, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
very cerebral already because, music is just like code, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
I have a very, very good friend, Amy Toby, and that's what she got her degree in, and was, I think, computer science and music. And like she's brilliant at trombone. I don't know, is it trombonist? Is that what? She's
Sure. Let's
brilliant, brilliant. I'm
trom-
like, trombonist. Sorry,
trombonist, trombonian,
trombonian.
tromboner.
But
No.
she's brilliant at it, and I meet people all the time, on engineering recruiting calls, where there's guitars and keyboards and all sorts of instruments and all sorts of, like, oh, I'm into electronic music, and I'm a DJ, or I'm this, I'm that, and the other thing, and that's really important, to kind of, anyways, see, is that you're predispositioned already to have that kind of real critical thinking mind if you come from the arts, because it's very systematic sometimes, right? So, anyways,
There
I
was almost like combining things together. There's uh you've got the skills, as
mhm,
we've been talking about, like you're
yeah,
capable of doing something. And then there's even the, I don't know how you categorize it. There's the I have the skill of learning skills, right? So you're
mhm.
yeah,
kind of adaptable.
yeah,
But then, a lot of what you were just talking about is uh I know how to direct my passion to
mhm,
something, right?
yeah,
And the
Mhm.
other side of that is like I can be passionate about something. Like,
yeah,
you know, uh, I have passion for stuff, but I don't know if I'd be good at doily manufacturing just because I have no passion for it, right? And so,
oh,
I,
yeah.
I mean, when you're thinking about people in the tech world, like, how do they balance? How do those two things kind of like come together to make a good person? I mean, not morally good, but an effective person. Like, because it doesn't. It seems like you've got to balance them out somehow in the tech world.
You know, I think that that's a really interesting question, to be honest with you, because everybody is an individual, and what makes me tick is going to look different than what makes y'all tick. And like, I think ultimately, if you have the passion, you're going to learn about it, and then the technology comes, right? And then
Mm.
the actual tactical piece of what you do comes if you're passionate about it, because you're always learning, or you're stretching yourself, or you're working in different collaborations, or you're doing this, that, and the other, excuse me, this, that, or the other thing. But then you also have that emotional piece that I think draws you to the humanity in the org, which also has to be balanced. I mean, there are people that are, that are the world's biggest, what, and can't code themselves out of a paper bag. But then there's also, people who are like the world's most subject matter expert, and they're the kindest people you'll meet.
Mm.
So, I mean, I don't know, that question is like, there's a lot to unpack in that question, to be honest with you, because I think it just
Sure.
has to be like, who are you as a human? Who are you as a holistic person, right? And why aren't we talking about those things when we're in interview processes? Like, I'm an open book, but I'm a total different animal, right? Whereas most people are like, I can't say this, I can't do this, I can't ask for that, I can't, and it's all these reasons why they can't, versus like, I can ask these questions about compensation. I can ask this about, like, what is the parental leave about? What is, tell me about your benefits, because there's a million hidden costs and benefits, right? Asking for things that you need. What is the trajectory of this project in the next 3, 6, 9, 18 months? Things like that, because you're too worried that you're going to screw something up and not get the job.
All right. So very last question.
Yes.
What do you think you would be doing in your life now if you had kept working at Neiman Marcus?
Oh God, I would be dead. I really truly believe that, because the lifestyle was very much Devil Wears Prada, and I would have probably had a heart attack by now. I
Mm.
mean, no offense to my people in fashion, but like, that was not my bag. That the whole situation for me was like, ooh, that's bright and shiny, and this is all what I want to do. And I was lucky enough to be one of the 13 that got chosen that year to be at Neiman Marcus. It taught me a lot about what I wasn't going to take at work,
Mm.
and
Right. Right.
what I wasn't willing to be like, you know, what I really truly wanted was to be closer to humans, not to shoes. And that's okay for me. And I'm not talking bad about Neiman Marcus, because Lord knows, like, people shop there, and it is what it is. And I just found out early that was not what I should be doing, and that I should be helping people, even though you can help people in fashion. But I mean, you can, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
there's ways in all of that. And I don't want to be all like, disparaging, but like, it wasn't for me. And I'm so glad that I saw that so early on and was like, I'm not doing this.
So do you think this it seems like there's like a leaky abstraction, so to speak, or there's a leakage between, like you're saying, the Devil Wears Prada, so the fashion industry,
Yeah.
and then you have the channel, the stores,
Yeah.
and then you have the buyers, and
Yeah.
there's other people running around.
Sure.
But do you think the culture leaks from the fashion or from the customer, or like which way does it flow? Like, do the customers define what you didn't like about it, or is it just like the shoe people who are manufacturing the
No.
shoes define it?
So leadership, it all starts with leadership.
Mm.
I feel, in all of my travels, and this is just not about fashion, if you have leadership that is a certain way and isn't matching humanity, communication, um, willingness, you know, feedback that's concise and
Mm.
actionable and kind, versus like, hey, guess what? Remember 9 months ago when you did this? It was wrong. So you're not getting a raise this year. That type of
Right.
stuff, like,
That's a
it all
long
starts
feedback
with
loop.
leadership. It all starts with leadership, and that bleeds down. But then also, if you have toxic employees, though, that bleeds up, right?
Mm.
So how do you kind of figure that out? I don't know. That might be a secret sauce kind of question. you know? But it does. I mean, if leadership allows a certain behavior, then it's going to keep happening, right?
Mhm.
And if employees allow a certain type of behavior, it'll keep happening.
And it's not just what you allow, but it's what you model too.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And I mean, like, did I have a great experience when I was at Neiman Marcus? Yeah, I learned a lot. But it just, again, I mean, and I've done this throughout my career. Like, this just doesn't feel right for me anymore because of how I've shifted as a human being. You know, and now I'm a mom and I work in tech and I do this and I have certain things that I need, right? So I'm going to leave this organization because it doesn't suit me anymore, right?
Mhm.
Because I need more flexibility or I need more money or I need more benefits or I need more, like, fill in the blank for anybody that's listening. It's more about like ensuring that you're checking yourself against the values of the company, right?
Well, that's a good place to end. We should model
I
some
think
good
so.
behavior and try to end on time.
Ooh,
We promised for you.
yes,
Just a little
yes,
bit over. Well, this has been really fun. It's been great.
Thank you.
Yeah, if people want to network with you, so to
yeah.
speak, or just find out more about you, what would you point them at?
So you can find me on Twitter. At Sidney Miller too, or you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, as Sidney Miller. I'm the only Sidney Miller in Phoenix, Arizona. So
Just get a phone book.
yeah,
Look it up.
just the yellow pages.
Uh-huh.
Wait, no, it's the white pages, isn't it?
Oh, it is the white pages. The yellow pages is business. Oh, I don't know if you
Yeah.
want to find me in the yellow pages because I don't have a business.
Yeah, otherwise you would have to be triple A1 Sidney Miller.
I know, right?
To
Oh
find
my
you in the Yellow
gosh, I
Pages.
know.
The best
White
plumbing
pages.
companies ever begin with triple A.
That's hilarious.
All
Has
right.
this been helpful?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
it's
it's been
great. It's
wonderful.
good
What
stuff.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank
I
you.
hope I haven't been talking out of both sides of my mouth because if I have, let me know.
Well,
I like
and the
feedback.
front too. All three sides are good. Well, speaking of talking out the front, this has been another software-defined interviews. You can find the links we mentioned and stuff for Sydney if you go to softwaredefinedinterviews.com and I don't know, search around for it. Once again, I've forgotten the episode number.
84.
Episode 84. So softwaredefinedinterview.com/84. Just like my other podcast host, Whitney is always there with the episode number. So we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.